Welcome to the Real News Network. President Obama invited Sergeant James Crowley and Henry Louis Gates to the White House to drink beer and talk over, I guess, race relations in America, because we're told they didn't talk about anything very specific about the incident. Joining us now to deconstruct this moment in American discourse is Glenn Ford. He's the executive editor of BlackAgendaReport.com. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation, Paul.
So, first of all, tell us what you make of the basic issue here. People are talking about this in various respects. Should President Obama spoken about it? Did he misspeak by getting involved in it? In fact, why don't we start with that? This comment that he said that what the police officer did was stupid. Apparently now something like 80% of Americans say they've heard about this incident, and a big majority don't approve of the way he spoke about it. It seemed to me uncharacteristic for President Obama to be so undisciplined, to say something he didn't know enough about. What do you make of all that?
In fact, I think that is the story. Here we have a president who assiduously avoided discussions of race, except when he was forced to, and who was a skilled handler of media, who could have parried the question about Dr. Gates' arrest easily, and maybe should have, but who seemed to jump into the fray with enthusiasm. Why? Well, I've reached the conclusion, and I think it's rather obvious, that there are class issues involved here. Remember when Sean Bell was killed in a barrage of 50 bullets in New York City. Candidate Obama was asked his reaction when the police were let off scot-free, and he essentially said, well, that's the law and we have to respect it. It was a very, very terse response, a lot different than his opponent Hillary Clinton's response, which was to give condolences to Sean Bell's family, etc. Earlier this year, when Oscar Grant in Oakland, California, was shot in the back, executed, in fact, by a transit authority cop in full view of onlookers and on videotape, President Obama had nothing to say about that. And yet, when his friend, Dr. Gates, is humiliated, of course, by a policeman in an incident that certainly is not one of the top 10 racial encounters of any day of the year. He jumps in. I cannot help but believe that this was a reflexive response by a classmate of Gates, not in terms of them graduating together, they didn't, but being members of that same class, that better class of blacks who come to each other's rescue, but trivialize and diminish the travails of us regular black folks.
Now, he did in his statement where he said that Crowley had acted stupidly, he did broaden it to say that we know there's such a thing as racial profiling, that people do suffer from this every day. Although, as you say, it's not something he talks about very often.
Yes, and he chose the Gates incident to talk about racial profiling. That in fact trivializes the whole episode, and we see how it ends if it is in fact over. It ends with people making nice to each other over a beer, as if something that threatens the lives of millions of black people every year can be settled over a beer. We're talking about public policy here, not Pabst Budweiser policy. I'll give you an example. In New York City last year, police stopped and frisked 535,000 people. 90% of those people stopped and frisked were Latino or black. If the pace continues this year, 630-something thousand citizens of New York will be stopped and frisked, and all but 10% of them will be black. Now, that is racial profiling. That is a public policy that intrudes upon the persons and the rights of literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. That how does one confront that kind of racial policy, racial profiling, the real kind? Are they going to have a big beer party and invite all the Latino and black men in New York City to have a beer with the cops? That's what I mean about trivializing an extremely serious problem.
Well, what's your understanding of how President Obama looks at race in America? Certainly his most famous speech was during in the context of the dispute with Reverend Wright. His race speech, although we made the point on the Real News that at least half of that speech was actually about foreign policy, where he was critiquing Wright's idea that there's such a thing as blowback as a result of U.S. foreign policy, but that's another question. But in the part of the speech that was about race, he essentially said that if you think that racism in America is systemic, your mind is locked in an older view of the world. He talked about people who had made a contribution in past decades, but they needed to catch up with today's world. How do you understand Obama's view of these issues?
Well, he said in that speech that racism was not endemic to the United States, not anymore. Previously, in Selma, Alabama, when he was on the campaign trail, he said that black folks had already come 90% of the way to equality. He didn't say what kind of metrics he was using to come to that conclusion, but it was a very harmful statement because that basically it signals that we don't have much of a problem, and if we do, it probably rests with the behavior of black folks and not the institutional, built-in, deep-fried racism that afflicts our society. If we don't have a problem, well, then you don't need to do anything special to deal with that problem. Maybe have a beer over it, and that'll settle it. But in fact, all of the indices of racial progress are going against black folks. For example, the wage gap is growing. The wealth gap is growing. The proportion of black folks in prison is growing. We are hard pressed by any measure that we can put numbers on to declare, as it is fashionable nowadays to declare, that black folks are better off than 30 years ago. Except we do have high-profile blacks like the president himself and, of course, Dr. Gates, and one could go on and on. But the conditions for the masses relative to white people have actually deteriorated.
Now, is there a change from, say, 30, 40 years ago that is significant, which is white America now able to accept a black elite?
White acceptance of the mobility of a black elite seems to be, in practice, used as a justification for further beating down masses of black people. Of course, the criminal justice system has all the numbers that we need. We've seen the raw numbers of folks in jail since 1972 multiply 5 or 6 times. And the percentage, of course, of those who are black has gone up inexorably. And yet, that is the same period in which we've seen all these success stories of individual blacks and this very small elite class as a whole. So it is very clear that the increased mobility for a small segment of black America does not translate into higher wages and more mobility or even more liberties for the masses of black folks.
Amongst African Americans themselves, before the election of President Obama, there was a lot of people I talked to and said, well, he can't talk about this stuff now. He can't really focus on black poverty now because he's got to get elected. He's got to be everybody's president. But afterwards, that's when he's going to deal with this.
Philosophically, Barack Obama is exactly what he seems to be. He's not playing political games. He's not playing pretend. He clearly, and I think the Gates affair actually shows this, he clearly does believe that the upward mobility of a segment of black America equals progress for the race as a whole. But it does not. In 1974, the median black family income was 63% of the median white family income. In 2004, the median income for black families was 58% of the income for white families. So we see a deteriorating position, real slippage, even as we see more and more black luminaries and millionaires every day. The two trends are not the same. And if we pretend that they are, and it is very convenient, not just for white people, but for this black elite to pretend that progress for their group represents progress for the race. If we continue to do that, then we are really abandoning the masses of black folks, and those numbers will continue to deteriorate.
Now, do you get any sense the mood's changing in the African American community? I know during the election and even recent, up until today, if you talk to a normal white person in the United States, they say Obama, they say President Obama. And if you talk to a black American, it's Barack. It's like, it's on a first name basis. He's one of us. Now, is there a feeling that, okay, now it's time you do something for African Americans and about black poverty? And do you get any sense that people are either disappointed or disillusioned that there isn't more happening?
Oh, sure. And I think you can see it in the Rasmussen poll, in that I believe it was 71% of blacks rated Obama's response to the Gates situation as good to excellent. 29% did not. Now that may not seem significant, but it is, because I believe that 4 months ago, before they'd seen as much of this president as they have now, it would have been 90% good marks for Obama among black folks. Those numbers are going to continue to slip because people are tired of waiting, because the illusion that Barack Obama is winking at us and waiting for his turn to finally make that move, that race man move. It can't survive the test of time.
Well, African Americans and trade unionists and many other segments of the society that had great hopes in this administration are now questioning what's really going to happen, and seem also caught in this classic between a rock and a hard place in American politics, worried about if you could critique Obama too much, do you weaken him and set the stage for the worst to come, which would be a hard-right Republican president administration. So in the next segment of this interview, let's talk about being caught between this rock and that hard place. Please join us on the Real News Network for our second segment with Glenn Ford.